You got to take it one task at a time. And that's something we learn in SEAL training. When you're getting hit from all angles, you literally have to get back to that mentality of literally make it to the next meal, prioritize my tasks, and be hyper focused on the immediate task in front of me and block out all the other noise. And when I get this one done, then I'll shift and I'll go to the next one. That served me well in being able to solve some of these challenges in business.
Imagine you're a Navy SEAL in a helicopter and you're dealing with multi-million-dollar buying decisions and lawsuits from your competitors. That's what it was like for Bear when he was building Born Primitive. He started with $4,000 and he's built a 9-figure business. This is an incredible story with lots of lessons. We talk about the perils of hiring inexperienced people and how to think about hiring. We talk about how to find your unique competitive advantage as a brand and focusing as much on what you're not as what you are. We talk about the increasing levels of difficulty as your business scales up. You're gonna learn a ton. Ladies and gentlemen, Bear from Born Primitive. Bear, super excited to have you on What to Do Next. Your story is incredible. This is gonna be a great conversation. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you.
Before we dive in, I got tons of questions for you that I'm dying to know more about. But tell us a little bit about Born Primitive, how it started, where it went, and what's next for you guys, kind of where you're at today.
Yeah, quick version. You started it about 12 years ago. It was a very niche product. I developed a pair of compression shorts for Olympic weightlifters. I was big into CrossFit at the time, and I just basically developed a prototype that I was going to use for myself. It was supposed to be one of one. The guys in the gym convinced me to make 200 of them. So I figured out supply chain. I read a couple books on overseas supply chain and got a couple prototypes made and narrowed it down, put in an MOQ order, established an LLC and sold out the first 200, then ordered 500, sold those out, ordered 1,000. And then we were kind of off to the races. And then I realized, well, this is one product that's going to limit me in the future. So let's try to have a brand. So then we started just like screen printing t-shirts and just real basic stuff, hoodies, just screen printing at the screen printing shop. And we'd go to every CrossFit event we could, set up a little card table, getting in front of the community as much as we could. And that kind of evolved into custom cut and sew, like performance apparel, sports bras, leggings, workout shorts, etc. And it just kind of went from there. I was active duty the whole time for the first 8 years, which was a whole nother wrinkle in that. Don't recommend trying to run a business while you're active duty. But we figured it out and didn't raise any capital, just bootstrapped the whole thing. And now we have 140 employees. We're sold all over the world. We've built it in a pretty substantial business. So plenty of gaps I got to fill there, but that's the gist of it.
And I can't wait to fill them. I mean, you sort of glossed over it. I was active duty. I mean, you weren't just active duty. You were in the most elite. You're a Navy SEAL, known to be one of the most arduous, intense programs that there is in the military. And that's your full-time job right after you start this thing. How in the world are you building and running a clothing brand while being a Navy SEAL?
Well, when you're 26, your gas tank is a little bit better than it is when you're 37. But honestly, I was just super passionate about both. So every minute I wasn't, doing the SEAL job. I was running the business. And as you can relate to, it's a lot of late nights, early mornings. You don't take vacations. When you do take vacations, you're working the whole time. So I started it with Mallory Riley, who we used to be married. Still run the business together. We're not married anymore. Still have a great relationship. But when we went to Hawaii once, and we would get up at 4 a.m. to start working, because that was 9 a.m. Eastern time. So we could work an 8-hour day. We would work 4 a.m. to noon. When the Starbucks would open at 6 a.m., we'd go to the Starbucks, work till noon. And then at noon, we would start our vacation day. But then we're going to bed at like 7 p.m. because we got to get up at 3:45, right? That's just one example, as I'm sure you can relate to, of like the sacrifice that it took. But at the time, I was kind of like, you're just dumb enough. You don't know any better. You just think that this is just what you do. So at the time, it was kind of like, this is what we're going to do because this is what it takes. Looking back, I'm kind of like, man, that was a pretty significant effort. But in the moment, you're so passionate about trying to build something from nothing. You just get after it.
But how did you actually make decisions? I mean, it's one thing when you're on vacation in Hawaii. It's another thing when you're on a military base or God knows where in the world as a Navy SEAL. What were the mechanics of that? Like, what was the cadence of communication, and how did you run the company?
Well, usually, if we were in training, I'd get back to my hotel, because we'd be on the road 300 days out of the year. I'd have a million emails waiting for me at 10 o'clock at night. I'm completely exhausted. We got to be up early the next day to train hard again. And I would just have to man up and get it done. And, other guys are calling their wives to check in and see how the kids are doing, whatever. And, I'd be calling Mal, we'd be talking about, hey, did you see that supplier email? Or did you see that email from the lawyer we got to get back to? That was the dynamic, of us as co-founders running it together. And then ironically on deployments, I was actually more productive. I remember I would take my calls with my ad agency who was in LA or Orange County, and I'd be taking that weekly call at like 2 a.m. All my buddies would be sleeping, and I'd be like, oh, I got to do my weekly call with the ad agency. I had to sacrifice a little bit, but it was, other guys were playing video games and watching movies in the downtime. I was just running the business, so it really wasn't that different. But it did take some tenacity, and obviously there were a lot of hard moments where you're like, why the heck am I doing this? Why can't I just live a normal life? That obviously you're trying to build something substantial, and you got to do something exceptional if you want to do that. And if you just do with the average, then you're going to be average. So I kind of approached it through that lens.
This went on for 8 years, I think.
Yeah, 8 years, and then I finally, I was starting to get more senior in the SEAL teams. And I realized I couldn't do all three really well, be a CEO, be a SEAL, and then I had a kid on the way, you know what I mean? And I knew I couldn't be a good dad. And so I had to cut one away, and I thought, all right, I did 8 years. That's a good run. But by that time, I think Born Primitive had like 60 or 70 employees. So I was like, all right, like I owe it to the families that, we now kind of take care of and have committed, to being a part of this, to be present and making sure I'm steering this ship in the right direction.
Hi, I'm David. I'm the president of Highbeam. But before that, I built a brand called David's Tea from 0 to 200 million in sales, and I took it public on the NASDAQ. Highbeam is a banking and cash management platform for consumer brands. It's the bank I wish I had when I was building David's Tea. We'll turn banking from a cost center for you today into a profit center for you tomorrow. We'll make you better cash back on ad spend. We'll maximize your yield on idle working capital through daily automated sweeps. And we have a host of AI-powered tools to save you a boatload of time. Check us out at highbeam.com and let's talk. And where did it break for you? Because it sounds like, you had a bit of a family business. Your wife at the time, and now ex-wife, was your partner. And it sounds like your brothers were in it as well. But you were still, I believe, through those 8 years, you're still the CEO, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just a lot of if I was local, I'd come in at like 3 o'clock. I'd have like 2 hours with the team before everyone leaves. And then a lot of times, on deployments or wherever, I'm calling from very weird locations and checking in. And, obviously having the phone helped a lot because I could be seeing emails coming in pretty quickly. And you get really creative on when you can get stuff done. I remember this. We were in a helicopter down in Florida doing a training mission where we were going to take a ship down. This is training. And we were in a helicopter waiting for the ship to show up so we could fast rope on it and take it down. And the ship was running late. So the helicopter pilot came over the net and said, hey, we got another 30 minutes. So we're just going to do racetracks. So just hang out and I'll let you know when the ship's in position and give you like the 5-minute warning to get your shit ready. Right. So I remember I pulled my phone out. I got my legs hanging out, took my gloves off, checked some emails, and I realized we had a supplier payment due. It was like $1 million payment. So I just logged into Chase and fired off like a 7-figure money wire, knocked out a few emails, and then put my phone back in my magazine pouch and put my gloves back on. And they're like, hey, all right, we're ready to rock. And I remember thinking after the fact is that was to me seemed very normal, but that was probably, in hindsight, that's kind of crazy. You know what I mean? That kind of resourcefulness of, every minute counts when you're kind of doing two jobs. And that example just kind of sticks out to me because, of course, my buddies had no idea what I was doing. And it's if they only knew I just wired $1.5 million to some place overseas right before we're about to hit the ship, they probably would get a chuckle. Somebody listening right now is probably straddling two universes where they're still full-time employed and maybe starting out on their business, or they have multiple initiatives going at the same time. And it's hard enough to manage having to be in multiple places at the same time mentally. You did it at the highest level. You were in the most elite group in the military, in the Navy SEALs, and also building what's now become a 9-figure business. What would you tell that person listening about, the hard-won lessons you have around the mindset you have to have in order to be able to do that and to go through what I imagine is quite stressful at times? Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs that hit me up and say, "Hey, can I steal 30 minutes?" And usually I'll do that, especially if someone local and it's a service member. But what I usually am very brutally honest with them in the very beginning, and it's like, all right, you need to understand. Let me lay out my first 6 years, right? 6 years, I'm active duty. We bootstrap the whole thing. For the first 5 years, it's just me and Mallory. We're literally doing everything. You have to learn everything. You're going to learn supply chain. You're going to learn about apparel. You're going to learn how to prototype tech packs. Yeah, every legal. You're going to learn. You're doing everything, as you know. And we didn't make a penny. I think Mal took her first salary at year 5.5. And I think I started paying myself at year 6. So if you would go to someone and say, all right, there's going to be a 7% chance of success, and there's a chance that you're not going to make a penny from this for 6 straight years, would you be willing to wait 6 years to see if your idea is going to work? And you need to be brutally honest with yourself, because if you're some dreamer that thinks, all right, in 6 months, I'm going to be, buying a house on the inlet, on the waterway and, printing money, it's not going to happen. And, so if you're one of those people that gets the shiny object syndrome, then don't do it. Go work a 9 to 5. There's nothing wrong with that. Your life is going to be way more chill. Now, you don't have that huge financial upside, most likely, unless you're in a certain industry, but there's nothing wrong with that. So I typically give people a more pessimistic view of entrepreneurship. But if they say, no, like, I'm attracted to that, like, that sounds like my kind of thing, then it's like, all right, well, you're just as nuts as I am, then this is probably exactly what you should do. You know what I mean? But I think people should have a very sobering approach to it. And I also think they need to be brutally honest on what is the actual value proposition of what your business is going to be. And if it's like a million other businesses that exist, red sell that before you start it, so you don't waste 4 years and then realize there's nothing original about what I'm doing and it's in a crowded space.
You mentioned having some hard moments where you're just like, why am I doing this? Take us back to some of the worst ones.
Probably just like learning stuff the hard way with supply chain. Like, I remember, we're trying to hire out, for these specific skills, and like, you're not an expert on any of these either. So to assess someone else to come in and, let's say, like, run our supply chain. I remember we hired like Mallory's friend, and God bless her, she's a nice person, but we gave her this like inventory management software and like, all right, do the tutorials. And then, okay, now you run supply chain. And I remember that, like, somehow, I'm deployed, Mal's doing whatever, like, we ordered like 36,000 units of maroon joggers, right? And I'm on deployment and I see this, like, I'm looking at inventory and I hit up Mal and I'm like, hey, there's no way this is right. Like, what, am I seeing this correctly? And we pulled on that thread and realized, like, our entire fall order was like that absurd. So on our most, one of our most profitable years up to that point, ended up being like a cash flow nightmare. I had to like loan 600 grand to the business because, of course, you can't write all that inventory off until you sell it, right? So our tax obligation was off of like $8.5 million in EBITDA. And we just sent like 3 million overseas that we can't write off. And then, so we had like 2.5 million we owed Uncle Sam. We ordered this ridiculous purchase order that was like literally 15 times what we should have ordered at the time. And it made us realize, like, all right, we can't just be hiring our friends and be like, okay, now you have this. We need to bring true subject matter experts in. And then right in conjunction with that, American Eagle tried to sue us because on one of our samples, our supplier actually stitched like their stitching pattern on the back of the pocket of a pair of jean shorts that we like missed. So like, I'm fighting these American Eagle lawyers in using my pre-law notes from Yale to try to like tell them not to sue me. It's literally, I broke out my freshman year pre-law notes from Yale to fight these 3 partners at this law firm that were probably billing $1,500 an hour to American Eagle. And it was just like, it was coming at me from all angles, right? And the walls were closing in. And that's what you sign up for in this game. But that was a tough moment.
I don't even know where to start. That was like 3 what to do next moments in one sentence. I mean, we started off, the typical way, I was trying to do this and I just work hard and like give it your all, kids, and show up. And then, I mean, you're in a helicopter somewhere. You hire a friend who knows nothing about supply chain, basically bankrupts you on a buy. I mean, I know enough to know that 36,000 of maroon joggers is not a good buy. And I don't know much about selling jogging pants. And then on top of that, you're getting sued by one of the biggest clothing companies in the world. What is going through your mind here? I mean, meantime, you also have to execute on missions. Like, you're a Navy SEAL still.
Yeah, and that's where it was just like, man, you got to take it one task at a time, and that's something we learn in SEAL training. Like we joke, like just literally make it to the next meal. And when you're kind of getting hit from all angles, you literally have to get back to that mentality of literally make it to the next meal, prioritize my tasks and be hyper focused on the immediate task in front of me and block out all the other noise. And when I get this one done, then I'll shift and I'll go to the next one. And I think that served me well in being able to solve some of these challenges in business. Just to give you perspective, when I ran the numbers on that fall order, I was like, all right, what did we sell in 6 weeks last fall collection, right? And I think it was like 34,000 units, whatever. And then I looked at the fall order for this year, and it was like a 239,000 unit order. And I was like, and that's when I almost puked. And I was like, what the heck? And it was because we were using that inventory management software, but like I think the inputs were just way wrong. So when Mal got the purchase order, she was like, well, that's what the software said. Like, you know what I mean? Because we had doubled our business year over year. So like we knew it was going to be a bigger order, but not like a 900% increase, more like probably 100% increase, So, but we got through it. But sometimes you got to learn the hard way. And that was a hard lesson learned.
You were profitable but broke at this point. You had to lend the business money. But what did you actually do to get yourself out of it? And what were the various actions you took?
Well, obviously like liquidation. So we like marked them on discount. And even like with Black Friday, we did like, free joggers on orders over like $100 just to like give people, lift that AOV. But I think literally those maroon joggers were on clearance for like 3 straight years because it's like you can only liquidate so much. And the good news though is like we were making so much money that we got away with it. Like had we been growing but like wasn't that profitable, we would have been dead in the water. But like our net operating margin at the time was like 26%, right? So like we were printing money, but it was all going to inventory. So, had our net operating margin been 9%, we wouldn't have been able to afford, like that would have killed us. I would have had to like, probably sell part of the business and just like get us out of hot water, and probably kind of do a distress sale because they would know we needed money. But liquidation channels and we're honestly still learning how to do that better. We have always done our own fulfillment. And while that was good and while our warehouse employees are awesome, one thing that can hide is how bad you are with inventory turnover because you're not getting charged by the cubic volume like you do at like a traditional 3PL. Whereas if you get that wrong, you're going to see it in the bill every month, right? With a 3PL. And we've always done our own fulfillment. So we would just get more and more space, and we have boxes just scattered everywhere. And while, yes, that puts a strain on the fulfillment team, it's not as black and white as getting a bill every month where it's like, hey, you just got charged 20 grand extra because you have 30,000 maroon joggers sitting there that aren't moving. You know what I mean? And then you go, oh crap, well, we need to put that fire out right now because we can't keep paying that. So I think that's something we're continuing to evolve on. But thank God, I think we finally have a handle on it.
In those moments, how do you assess the magnitude of the issue? I mean, there's no magic wand when you buy the world's supply of an item and make a buying mistake. I've made them many times at David's Tea, but here you are, you're sitting with 6 to 7 years potentially supply of maroon joggers. But your margins are good enough. You're also getting sued by American Eagle. How do you're able to articulate, okay, we did a gift with purchase and we marked down the item. How much of your mental power is each one of these problems taking up? And what's your framework for kind of assessing, the action that's needed and how big of an issue this truly is?
Well, it was a huge issue. So, obviously it was like, this needs to be actioned immediately. And so those liquidation strategies, we would do joggers flash sales too, or like, every, joggers are $30 and we'd run it for 4 or 5 days and we would sell a ton. So like, it was our best selling product. So that was like a saving grace that it wasn't like a bad product. The color wasn't like the number one product, but it was still popular enough. But really, like I said, because our net operating margin was so high at the time, and because this was during COVID, so you remember how absurd that was. Everything was inflated. I think that's why we got away with it. But that's also why we ordered way too much, because that COVID spike, caused everyone to get super aggressive on their buys. And if you remember, the lead times were higher then too. So you also had to account for like hyper growth, but also longer lead times. So, while there was the blessing of like this tailwind of COVID, but it was the curse of then your projections were just crazy. But we worked through it. And I think, that's, as a business owner, as that's the hardest part, is you're constantly, it's like whack-a-mole with problems. And some problems are really big problems, and some ones are smaller ones that can tie up your bandwidth that shouldn't. And I think that's as is with CEOs and founders, like you have to get really good at choosing your battles and choosing where to apply your time. Because if you let it, it's like a gas, it'll fill any space it's given. And that's something I continue to work through. And how accessible I am to the employees and just other people hitting me up. Like you got to be really careful about that, or you'll spread yourself really thin.
Well, let's talk about that. How have those, early pivotal moments that were really difficult, how have they changed how you both manage a team and think about your buying and approval process and just the structure of how you run the company?
I think the biggest lesson, like if I were to go do this all over again, I always joke with my president, Tony, it's like, imagine building a house for the first time and you have no idea how to build a house and you're kind of like watching YouTube videos and stuff. And you realize like you put up the drywall before like you ran the electrical. So you got to rip all the drywall down and then, oh shoot, we forgot to run a certain thing of plumbing. So we got to rip all the floors out, whatever. If you did that and you build a house, took you 3 years and, if you built it again, think how much better you'd build it because you'd go, oh yes, this comes first. We can't do that again. But also imagine if you brought in like master trades, people from the various trades that were masters in their craft and you choreographed it, but you let them execute the build. And that's like, cause now I have a skill set. Like if we ever sell Born Primitive, like I'm going to probably take a break and then I'm going to immediately launch another business because now I know how to do it. It took me 12 years to figure it out, but now, I think I could spin something up in 18 months and we'd be rocking on something. But the biggest takeaway I'd say is like really truly finding subject matter experts and delegating and letting them run that aspect of the business with your overarching intent above that. Like we just brought in a girl, Melissa, who's an absolute savage. And she's been helping with the inventory and our product design, all these things. And I know like, I don't even have to get in her way. Like let that woman cook because she's so good at what she does that I can kind of pop in for the meetings and see the new shoe designs and this and that. And it's just fun for me because I know I have like, it requires zero of my talent or abilities because she's far beyond what I will ever be. And I think that's the end state you need to try to get to where you've kind of delegated almost everything. And then you're really just steering the cruise ship, to use like like a Navy analogy, like you need to be up on the bridge wings looking at the horizon and make sure you're going in the right direction. You can't be down in the engine room turning wrenches, with the engineers, right? Because then no one's looking at where the ship's going. And so that's my job now is to be looking 3 to 5 years out at all times and super zoomed out decisions. But it took a while to get there because as you know, in the early years, you have to do everything. You don't have the luxury unless you raised a bunch of capital, or had some of your own, capital available. Then, of course, you could hire out some studs right off the bat. But if you're bootstrapping it, you're going to have to kind of learn the hard way.
I've actually had some of the opposite experiences where I thought I was bringing in an expert, only to find out later I wasn't. Do you think about trust but verify? Is there a way you kind of think about that internally?
Yes, and that I've been burned on that too. And the hardest thing is like, if you're not a true subject matter expert on what you're hiring, like a lot of it's intuition because like they can come in and BS you in an interview and they sound like super legit. And, let's say, stick with the inventory example. You're like, oh, this person came from this like super big company and like they were running this and like, right. Oh, it all sounds great. And then 9 months in, you're kind of like, what's going on here? So I do think that is a challenge. And that's why I think I hate to say it, guys, but like, hire slow, fire fast. You know what I mean? Like you'll know pretty quick, that intuition and like move on to the next person. Because if you waste 2 years with one person that isn't hacking it and it's a critical role in your business, like that could cause so much downstream effects that are going to just make you pull your hair out, as the founder. And that's one thing we've learned. We've gotten way better at it. There's been some people we've hired and we've fired them literally within a week. And I hate that, but like, this is a business. Like we can't be hand holding. And if they fool us in an interview, but they're not going to hack it, in the position, then like, that's not on me.
I think you launched in 2014, 2015, you come up with a women's sports bra and you launch it, I believe at a CrossFit event.
Yes.
And that really helped you amplify your community. What was that experience like?
Yeah, well, Mal deserves all the credit for that one. I would say that was our first dive into like performance cut and sew fabrics and apparel. Before that, it was like we're buying like blanks and like screen printing on them, and then we had our compression shorts, but very little technical apparel. And Mal made some adjustments to like a popular like Lululemon bra, but more for girls that like actually, have a little bit of muscle in CrossFit. And the community just went crazy over that because she actually solved a need. That was kind of the light bulb moment of like, oh, wow, like this is way better than screen printed t-shirts and hoodies because the margin's better. And then we just kind of expanded from there. Then, leggings and men's workout shorts and then performance, tops for men, and it just went from there. And, now we have performance footwear, which has been, a massive pivotal moment for us. The ceiling of our company just went up tenfold because of that one innovation. We have tactical apparel now for military and law enforcement. We have outdoor apparel for backcountry hunting, as well as, tactical application as well. So we've kind of taken that playbook of, becoming like an endemic brand in like the CrossFit scene. But then I realized like, all right, there's a ceiling to this. We need to, hit other verticals, but we need to do it in a credible way. You can't just enter a vertical and be like, okay, we're here now. Like, come shop us. You got to do it in a way where you're one of them. You know what I mean? And in every space we entered, that was genuine. Like when we entered the tactical space, like it makes sense because of my background and all the people that were involved in that product development. We weren't trying to be posers of like, oh, let's try to act tactical. It's like, no, this was my life for 8 years. So I was the end customer. I know what the end customer needs. And same thing with the outdoor line, backcountry hunters, stuff like that. Like we had the best in the world representing us in that vertical because it's one of those communities where it's like, if you make something, if you screw something up, or let's say in your content, like someone's holding the bow wrong or something, like you'll get crucified because they'll know it's not genuine. And I think we fortunately were able to do that the right way in each of the kind of the calculated decisions we made to enter these new spaces.
It's really hard to jump from community to community. In fact, you almost seldom see it. And even with the authenticity that you brought to the table for the two, never mind product extensions, but community extensions, did that at all alienate the community that got you where you were, which was the CrossFit community? How did you think about bridging, the new frontier with the existing customer base?
It wasn't that difficult because there actually was a lot of overlap. So like that fitness crowd, the tactical customer is also typically a fitness customer, as well as like a backcountry hunter. That's a very rigorous type of hunting. You got to be fit. You're carrying a heavy pack. You got to carry the animal out. You're out there 8 or 9 days. So fitness is a big component of that world too. So I actually think it overlapped quite well. And maybe there's a little bit of alienation, probably, for an example, would be like our female fitness customer. If they go to our Instagram now or our website and they see a tattooed guy like me shooting a suppressed rifle with night vision goggles on, she might say, this isn't my brand, right? Or the guy drawing a bow or girl drawing a bow. I hate hunting. So, I'm going to go shop Lululemon or Athletic, whatever. And that's fine. But we wanted to be true to who we were, and we understood that, okay, while we're going to lose, maybe some of our original core audience, this thing is evolving, and we want to just be true to who we are. And honestly, it's just mainly an extension of me as well as some of our other employees. Like the stuff that we enjoy is typically kind of represented, in our apparel offering. But because they were such similar verticals, I think it made sense. Now, if we were to try to go into, say, something like golf, it'd be like, all right, that's a little bit of a stretch. And some of our competitors actually tried to do that, and I think got absolutely crushed. But ours, for us, like kind of made total sense.
But some would say in that moment when you're considering community extension, and I never want to talk about the product extension, because going from one SKU compression source to 1,200 SKUs is a hell of a leap, and I'm sure you learned a ton along the way. But even just adding these other two communities, much as they're true to you, wouldn't somebody say to you, or I'm sure this went through your mind, the CrossFit community, or even just training as an extension of that, is a massive market. It's huge. You mentioned Lululemon. Lululemon is multi-billion-dollar business. Did you consider just staying true to your knitting and just going narrower and deeper on that one category? And what did you ultimately conclude there?
Yeah, I honestly, and again, for any founder, especially early on, I think you always need to be really honest what your unique value proposition is. And while we make really good activewear, and I'll put it up against anyone, it is such a crowded space to stand out in a field like that where everyone's trying to launch a leggings brand, a sports bra brand, whatever, athleisure brand. I thought our unique value proposition was hitting a bit of a ceiling, right? Because it's like, all right, our activewear, we're doing like 35 million a year. I was like, I think we're kind of capping out of like the market we can reach with the style we have. We're kind of a gritty, get after it. We're not like the prancing around Lululemon brand or girls doing yoga. Like there's a ceiling to who that customer is. And I recognize that. And that's why, I wanted to launch our footwear originally, because I was like, all right, that can reach a bigger audience. And then, but with tactical and outdoor, I was like, all right, we have a way more unique value proposition because of the unique background of me and the other guys that are in part of the business. Like, we can go rent a Black Hawk helicopter and get a bunch of SEALs and shoot some really badass content and blow stuff up and shoot machine guns and stuff. Not everyone can do that. Anyone can go in the gym with a content, media company and do the workout and, the glistening, the sweat, and make a cool hype video. It's like, that's so easy, but it's a way bigger barrier to entry to go into like a space like tactical apparel or let's say backcountry hunting. It's like, all right, if we're going to do a 9-day hunt and I got to get that cameraman into the backcountry, there's not that many people that can do that and hang. So like, I like the idea that like there's a bigger barrier to entry to these spaces. And there's less competition. And a lot of the businesses in that space, both of them, mainly tactical, relied on a lot of government business to be really successful, but their D2C business was trash. And their business, from what I saw, it was stale. Their website sucked. Their marketing sucked. There was no innovation because they're getting these big checks from Uncle Sam. And as you know, if you cut your teeth in D2C, like you learn to be a savage with all that stuff, your LTV, your CAC, your paid media, your email retention, text retention, you're doing all these things to try to compete as a D2C brand, where these big legacy brands that were selling to Uncle Sam, like they didn't do any of that. And I'm thinking, all right, if we can take what we've learned in D2C, bring some super unique, hard-hitting content that these brands aren't willing to do, which it blows me away that a tactical brand wouldn't want to show dudes with guns, but they wouldn't. We're going to come in and disrupt this. And if they try to then like lean into D2C, we're 10 years ahead of them. And then, hey, if we start getting government business, now it's game over. And so that's the strategy, and it's working. So that's kind of why, we chose to make that leap, really, because I thought we might be hitting a ceiling of where we could really, what the market we could really capture with fitness. Ironically, now that we're winning more tactical and outdoor customers, it's lifting our fitness side, because guess what? Those people work out, they buy our tactical pant, and then they go, oh crap, they got workout stuff. Oh, they got a training shoe. Well, I like the brand. They seem like they align with our values. Let me try their workout shorts. And that's a pretty cool thing.
I mean, you went into all these different categories. You're expanding into different community groups, going from 1 to 1,200 SKUs. Where were some of the biggest mistakes you made there?
Well, I think our three biggest kind of expansions was footwear, tactical, and outdoor. And obviously we're not through it yet, but I think we went 3 for 3 on all of those, and thank God. Footwear, we're launching 5 new shoes this year. So we just launched a tactical boot. We got a running shoe. We got a barefoot trainer. We got a lifestyle sneaker, all kinds of other stuff coming. But I think getting back to like, all right, what is your unique value proposition? I think you can get mud sucked into additional products that aren't really going to move the needle, and they take your product development team, it takes them time to develop, and then it's like, all right, that product did 20 grand last year. Like, why are we even messing with a blank t-shirt? You know what I mean? Like, is that really what we're good at? When there's like companies like, let's say True Classic that are doing like, I don't know, 100 million a year selling blank tees. I don't need to compete with that, because that's not what we're good at. Now, it's a great product, and if you wore ours and theirs, it'd be like, these are identical. But that's not what you're known for. So kind of hone in on what you're good at. And for us, like, we're learning that's we're kind of turning into a pant company, where it's like our pants just freaking kill, our outdoor tactical pants, our jeans. And it's like, oh, that's kind of I didn't kind of see that coming, but if that's what the data is showing us, and I'm sure you did this, but you can study LTV based on first product ordered. And that becomes a fascinating tell on like, all right, if I can get someone to buy a pair of jeans in their first order, their 60-day LTV goes up 30%. Like, that's a huge metric. Whereas if someone buys like a screen printed t-shirt, their LTV is not so great. And once you start learning those numbers, they really don't lie, because sometimes your intuition of what you think's working is quite different than what the numbers show. And I love that stuff, because that's where you can really have fun with it. And then that guides strategy, of course.
Yeah, you're bringing me back to my David's Tea days with the buying team. We used to do two things. One, we'd always sit down every year and look at what percentage of our SKUs does 80% of our sales represent. If the answer is 20, 30%, it's like, guys, we have too many SKUs. There should be, obviously it's not going to be a perfect one-to-one, but there should be a more normal distribution. And the second thing is we discovered that when we get them to buy, we had a tea called Cold 911. And when we got them to buy that tea, to your point, the long-term value of that customer, when that was the entry point of the brand, when they, tea they associate when they're sick, that was really our opportunity for them to try our products that gave them the most relief. And they tended to stay with us longer if they did. And that was a huge unlock for us.
So I don't know if you remember when you and I did a call, I don't know, a year ago at this point,
yeah.
And you talked about that. You said, hey, look at your SKUs. I bet your top 15% or 80% of your revenue, and you were right, and that is a lesson learned, because you go down the list, it's like, all right, especially for like a buyer's decision, it's like, all right, if we need to order our top 15% or these like tertiary SKUs that like are going to be these small buys, like cut those out and focus on what is working, and that's a hard exercise because you get attached to some of these other SKUs, like, but that jacket, it's such a cool jacket. Like, we can't cut that. Like, it's awesome. And it's like, well, dude, it did 18 grand last year. So really, you know what I mean? When we're like, no. So that's where you separate the emotions and focus on the numbers.
The parallels of you leave the SEALs. The SEALs is mission driven, structured, and you go into entrepreneurship full time. It's a ton of freedom, but no safety net. What was that transition like for you mentally? Not the usual things, but just in terms of how you had to adapt as an individual.
Yeah, I think my transition was probably way easier than most guys. A lot of guys are really lost getting out of the service, because especially for a job like the SEAL teams, like it's such a dynamic job. And then really most jobs you're going to find outside of that are going to be a disappointment as far as the adrenaline, the camaraderie you're going to get. Whereas I had been running Born Primitive from the beginning, so it was more just like, okay, now I can do this full time. The biggest adjustment was just the community that you lose, because like you're on the road, I don't know if you played sports, but it's kind of that locker room vibe, but like multiply that by 100, right? These guys know you better than your own family does. Like, I'm by far, you're on the road with them all year long. Your platoon is, about, usually 18 guys. And then you got a troop of about 60 guys that you travel everywhere with. And they're like family, man. And then you lose that and you try to replicate it with your workplace here, but it's never going to be the same. So that's, I'd say, the hardest adjustment. And a lot of guys tend to isolate, after service. And we kind of suffer in silence a little bit. And that's something we're all trying to work on as a community and checking in on each other and things like that. But the business transition was really easy, because it was like, oh, finally I get to focus on one thing. And I was way less stressed, and I could really try to hone my craft as a CEO, even though I'm still absolutely have a lot of work to do on that front. But as far as the employment transition, it was really easy.
Some people in business like to say we're a family about the office. You mentioned it's obviously not that, and I totally agree with you on that. But how do you think about workplace culture? And was that a mistake that you made coming out of the SEALs?
It's, as you might recall, like we joke about like the early days when we had like 11 employees, like some of the OGs, we joke like that. We didn't realize that was the best it was ever going to be, right? Like, we'd all go to the bar together, and I'd throw the Amex down. We'd run a bar tab for like $800, and we'd all have too much to drink. And then remember one year for Christmas, I took everyone to Dominican Republic. Like, we rented like a mansion on the beach, and we literally everyone had their own room, and we just like drank Coronas and tequila all day and just had a blast. It's like, you can't do that when you have 140 employees. So, the gone are the days where everyone wants to go drink beers with the CEO. And I'm totally fine with that, because I've also been in the other seat, right? Where if like, I wouldn't want to go get beers with my commanding officer, because it's like, that's my boss. And it's like, you got to kind of be on your game, and there's a time for that. But, I think it's just evolved where, we have a good time here. I think the people we attract are super type A motivated people. And the cool thing is, I think as your brand grows, you attract talent because people have seen what you've done. And they are coming to you now because of what you stand for. Whereas in the early days, you got to tell people who you are. Hey, we're Born Primitive. We do this. And like they're hearing it kind of for the first time. You're kind of convincing them why to work for, why they should work for you. And now it's the other way around. People come in and say, hey, I saw what you did on Veterans Day and I saw this. And hey, I want to be a part of this because it looks like this matches my lifestyle and my kind of value system. And that's a pretty cool shift. So we try to make sure that we maintain that in the building. And I think it's really important to hire people that align with that culture. And that was a big thing. I used to work for Red Bull before the military, and I thought they did a really good job with that because I remember they would ask you these questions in the interviews like, hey, when's the last, tell me an example when you broke a rule and what was it? And have you been in a bar fight and this and that? And I'm like, well, this sounds like a trap. Like, what do I, you know what I mean? But they wanted to see if there was a little bit of anti-authoritarian in you that would align with the culture of the brand. And they wanted that, which it was like kind of, I was like, I don't know if I should give the true answer here, but it of course worked out. So I just think it's important to, especially as you grow, make sure that the people coming into the company, match that value system. That way in 2 years, the company isn't, is totally unrecognizable if you get away from that.
Listening to how you talk about brand, I can't help but think, building a brand is sometimes as much about what you're not as it is what you are. Do you ever think about it that way, as in terms of what Born Primitive isn't? I mean, it feels so clearly defined in who your customer is. But do you start by process of elimination on who it is?
Yes. And I think that's a great exercise. I think that's a great point. And we actually, I think I stole that from Red Bull because that's exactly what we did, where they would test you. They would give you a brand, this is who we are, this is who we're not. And there'd be examples on a slide deck. This is yes, this is definitely no. And you would learn that as an entry-level employee. And I think the big lesson, that I've learned is that you can't try to speak to everyone, and you need to be totally fine with that. If you're trying to speak to everyone, you're speaking to no one. And we've done the opposite. We've been like, all right, this is who we are. Take it or leave it. We understand it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but that means we're doing it right, because the people that do align with that are going to be that much more loyal and that much more passionate about repping the logo because it means something to them and what it stands for. And in the early years, that can be hard. But it's if you don't do that, unless your product is so exceptional or so unique that you're solving some unique need that hasn't been done before, you're just going to get crowded out, and no one's you're not going to stand out, in the noise, and your business isn't going to work. So I think, on day one, you got to plant that flag in the ground and say, this is who we are. And there's so many different ways you can do that, or causes you can align with. And it's all good as long as you're consistent, and you're unapologetic in that. We haven't been shy at all about how we roll. And there were some years where that was kind of hard, depending on what was going on in society at the time, culturally, politically, whatever. That can make you question your beliefs a little bit of ooh, I don't want to rock the boat too much. And it's well, hey man, this is what you guys are, this is who you are. So, now's your time to validate this is your DNA, and you're not going to waver on that.
And what makes that harder in the early years than now? I mean, now the stakes are higher for you. There's still the backdrop of issues that may be in conflict with the brand. What made that particularly hard in the early days? Because
in the early days, you don't know if that's right or not, right? Because you've never done it. Now I know that's 100% how it should be. And if I were to launch a business again, I would be okay, this is a non-negotiable. But in year 5, an example would be, and just, I'll stay just objective on this, is we've always supported law enforcement and military. And as you recall, there was a period of time where law enforcement, it was a very volatile dynamic. And every year we would launch a Thin Blue Line collection, and we donated a bunch of the proceeds to a charity that supported the families of fallen police officers. I think most would agree, hey, if a police officer dies and we're going to try to help that kid's college fund, that's a good thing that we can all support. Well, we had our next Thin Blue Line collection set to come out. And as you know, you've planned these out 6, 7, 8 months in advance. So it's not like we were trying to rock the boat, but it was in the middle of a very culturally volatile time. And we're all right, do we want to stir up the hornet's nest by literally launching this in the middle of the riots and things like that? And we kind of had to kind of chew on it. And it's at the time, I think, maybe we had, 30 employees. And I'm all right, well, I'm in charge of these people's livelihood. And if I screw this up and there's backlash, then I'm gonna have to fire 15 of these people. So I felt a lot of pressure, and I was still so early as a CEO that I didn't have the confidence that no, dude, you're fine. Just stick to your value system, and you don't need to be be tactful in how you deliver that message. But also it's okay to be supporting the families of fallen police officers. Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't need to be, and we ended up launching the collection, and I got so many hate DMs that I won't even read them to you. I mean, they were horrible, and it really rattled me, because then I'm like, okay, did I screw this up? But I was like, all right, well, we've already done it. We can't walk it back, because then other people are going to be hitting us from the other side. And we stuck to our guns. And I think getting through that storm validated for me that, hey, this is just how you got to do it. And you absolutely aren't going to be for everyone. And that if that's the case, guess what? That means you're doing it right. And then we just leaned into that even harder, not in a I think like a distasteful way, but to say, hey, this is how we roll, and we're proud of it, and that's just what we're going to be.
When you're in that moment, though, it can feel like a personal attack.
Oh, it was. Oh, the DMs that I was getting to my personal Instagram and customer service was getting, I mean, it was crazy. I was like, guys, we have lost our mind here. And yeah, when you haven't, now, where is it now? I laugh at it. When I see those comments on Instagram, like when there's guys shooting a gun and someone gives me a 5-paragraph comment, I'm like, all right, you just spent 20 minutes on your couch writing a comment that I'm not even going to read. And you're never buying our product anyway. So it's hilarious to me now. But in the early years, you don't have that validation yet. And that can be, that can keep you up at night.
I think the community you've built is amazing, in that your brand is so well defined on what you're about. How do you think about building community?
Being willing to really put out what you're all about. And it needs to be validated with action. And so we've always tried to use our platform to actually give back, particularly the military and law enforcement communities. We've also given a lot back to cancer research and prevention, which obviously affects us all. But particularly military and law enforcement, we're like, okay, this is kind of a part of our DNA. We want to leverage our platform to help these communities, mainly on the charitable front. And that has evolved into this giant beast that we have kind of created, where, 2 years ago, I had this idea of like, what if we paid off a bunch of veteran medical bills on Veterans Day and donated a bunch of our profits and sales and all this. And it was just a random idea. We wanted to try to pay off $5 million in debt. We ended up doing $11 million. I mean, it was just crazy. It ended up being about 7,000 veterans were debt free by Christmas. And, I got to call a lot of these people, and it just kind of took on a life of its own. It went viral. I went on a bunch of news outlets and podcasts. So this last year, I was like, hey, we got to make this bigger. Let's try to double it. So I called up Black Rifle Coffee. That's founded by a Green Beret. And I talked to Evan, the founder, and I said, hey, man, why don't you join us on this? I've seen you guys have used your platform a lot to give back. And hey, I just did it. It's pretty simple, but I'd love for you to join forces. So he said, heck yeah, let's do it. And this last year, the goal was to do 25 million. We ended up doing 35 and change, and ended up being over 17,000 veterans were debt free by Christmas of this past year. And there was one individual, she was a Gold Star spouse and Army veteran. Her husband died in Iraq. Her bill was $341,000. And I got to get on a plane, fly to Denver, and hand deliver her debt relief letter, letting her know that the debt had been paid in full. And that to me is, it's not just a punchline anymore. You don't say you support the troops, you're actually backing it with action. And that was just as beneficial to me and my mental health as it was for these people that, we're giving them this great news right before Christmas. So I think that's been kind of our handrail and our guiding principle throughout all of this is it can't just be about apparel. There needs to be a bigger purpose here. And in the early days, we did that, just the numbers were a lot smaller, you know what I mean? But as the brand grew and our ability to give back grew, we continued to raise the bar, and I'm proud to say that we've lived up to that.
But you did it long before that. I mean, you were doing it with CrossFit. You said earlier in the conversation, you got to be a $35 million business which is nothing to sneeze at, just on the CrossFit market. How did you do it in the early days?
Yeah. So we would do apparel capsules and donate a portion of proceeds. But then another example is during COVID, all the gyms shut down. So we did this, we threw together this thing last second. I was like, all right, for 10 days, we're going to get every gym that wants to participate. We're going to give them a promo code, and we're going to give them 50% of profits of all, so they can promote that code to their gym and say, hey, go shop Born Primitive, use, code CrossFit Park Ridge. And after 10 days, they're going to wire us 50% of the profits. or maybe it was revenue. I can't even remember. And everyone got on board. We got this system where it would auto generate them like creative that they could post on Instagram and share in stories. It was a really cool thing. And they could instantly sign up. They just go to a landing page, punch in their information, and like they're immediately enrolled. The promo code's created. And I think in a 10-day period, we ended up donating, I think over $250,000 to CrossFit gyms to help them stay open when COVID, shut everything down. And that was just, again, another example. And all these gym owners are, hitting us up like, hey, this is great. Like, what's the catch? And it's like, there's no catch. Guys, we're figuring this out just like you are. But, this is a unique circumstances we're all living through. But hey, the CrossFit community at the time was, the reason we existed. That's where our brand was born and where we lived. So we got to take care of these gym owners because they're the reason we have gotten to where we are. So it was always just top of mind of how can we do some good.
Bear, you said you're not really a public guy. How do you and concurrently you also talk about how you basically took some of your unique advantages as Bear the person and applied them to the brand Born Primitive. How do you think about the distinction between personal brand and the company brand?
I'm not original enough to come up with a fictitious brand. I think a brand almost needs to have personality traits like a person, right? And if you're doing it right, you could explain a brand as if it was a person. And so from the early days, like when Mal and I were building this, it was essentially an extension of our own personality. The grittiness, the tenacity, the hard work, the unapologetic approach. That wasn't me being like, oh, if I were to create a brand, what would I create? That was just me being portrayed through an apparel company, in the patriotic nature, supporting the troops. Like that's just because it's how I was raised. And that's pretty much how we've done it from the beginning, man. I wish I could give you a more original answer, but I'm not creative enough to come up with an alternate personality. And I think, I probably could lean a lot more into leveraging kind of my image and like I could have a social media person, and like I've had mentors tell me like I should have a content person follow me around, and when I'm doing meetings, like film me and have them make a reel of it, like, and post it that day. And when I'm doing calls or whatever, and I'm sure like there's a world where that would, grow my own brand and probably then help Born Primitive. It's just, that's not really my style. It's hard for me to kind of self-promote in that nature, but I know like, I'm not bashing the people that do it, because there's a world where that actually can really help your own business. If you have 300,000 followers because they love you and like the brand, then you can use your own channel. When you launch that sale, you do a post and then it actually gets a lot of traffic. So I've wrestled with that, and I think I've done okay. But there's absolutely opportunity for me to lean into that a lot more.
What's been harder than you expected building Born Primitive?
I think the hardest thing is as soon as you think you've figured it out, you get to the next level where there's a whole new set of problems that you have to learn. And it just seems like the learning curve never ends. Like right now we're building up like a $16 million facility for our headquarters, like right down the road. I bought the land, I got the building company, and it's like, I'm dealing with the city and getting approvals and like banks and all this. And it's like, you think you have the previous phase mastered, and now you're dealing with like giant real estate project and all this stuff. You start getting hit with more lawsuits. I'm sure you did. So we get these ADA lawsuits all the time now. And it's just like, it's a never ending learning curve that, keeps you on your toes. And your professional development is just at an incredible pace because you're forced to learn a lot of times the hard way. If you get sued for ADA compliance, it's like, oh, well, now we need to do this, this, and this. And it's like, I would have never known that if someone didn't sue me. It's just like whack-a-mole, man. But what has gotten better now is putting the right people in place and letting them run their departments. And those people are such a force multiplier because, when I was in SEAL training early on, I'll never forget this analogy, and I want business owners to think like this too. But it was our first time learning what we call like land warfare. So like, let's say you're patrolling and you get contacted by the enemy, start getting shot at, whatever. You're taught how to maneuver given the situation, given the terrain. And typically, have a squad of guys, or a platoon of guys, and there would be one guy kind of in charge of calling out where we're going to maneuver to, what the call is going to be, et cetera. And since I was an officer and we were in training, that was my job, right? And we've never done this. Like we're like 2 days in, right? So we don't, we know as much as you do basically. And we get contacted and it's a big shit show and we did it wrong. And I, of course, like led us in the wrong place. And, you have blanks. So you shoot back because they want to see you simulating like the gunfight because you, of course, have to shoot back at the enemy. And we finished the run and we debriefed it. And one of the officers who was actually a SEAL pulled me aside. He said, hey, what'd you do wrong? What'd you do different? Okay. And he said, all right, for this next run, I'm taking your gun. And I was like, why would you do that? And he's like, because your job isn't to be a shooter. He said, as soon as the shooting starts, I want you to step back off the line and I want you to assess the terrain, take 20 extra seconds and make a decision on where you can maneuver your unit to be advantageous, right? Because if you're shooting down your gun, you're not looking at what the up and out of where you're going to maneuver your element. So he said, all right, so debrief that. And then I want you, your next run, I'm taking your gun. I'm banning you from having a gun. And we did it. Sure enough, the shooting started. I looked up, I looked around. Oh, there's a perfectly good hill right there that we can maneuver around and flank these guys. And I did it right. And I think that's a lesson for as you get more senior, you have to pull yourself off the firing line and you need to let the people below you be the shooters. You need to be maneuvering where you're going. Because if everyone's on the gun, there's no one running the show. It's just a bunch of shooting going on, and that's not sustainable. For the first 30 seconds, 60 seconds, it might be, but eventually, people are gonna start running out of bullets, and there's no plan, and that's gonna fall apart real quick. And I think there's so many analogies with business where that holds true. And for people that have started the business and have at some point done every role, it's really hard to, step off the line because at one point you were the social media person, you were the supply chain person, you were the marketing person. You did it all at one point, and you still think you're the best at all of it, even though you're not. And you want to get in and tool around with the email marketing plan and the fonts you're using and all the little things that you used to do. And you have to pull yourself off the line and let your people run it.
The parallels between being a SEAL and running a business are clear and somewhat, one could see how that you would benefit tremendously from that training. I think Masterclass even has a program right now, for business executives to learn some of the tricks from and the training from being a SEAL. What are the things you had to unlearn? What was it from being a SEAL that actually doesn't apply to running a business like Born Primitive?
I think the hardest transition is, and I say this with the utmost respect to people who are not SEALs, but the caliber of individual and how they are wired is something that you will never replicate in any organization on the planet. And I think that's true for many special operations units, not just SEALs, because the culture is so different that your expectations of humans from that point forward will forever be tainted. So when you go into a civilian organization, you have to lower that bar because you're gonna be very disappointed on what the new standard is and expectation is. And Mal kind of had to reel me in quite a few times, and she'd say, "Hey, these are just regular employees. This isn't a SEAL platoon. You can't run it like a platoon because in the SEAL teams you can be very blunt in how you communicate and all right, this is what we're doing. All right, no one bitch about it. Like just move out on the plan and I don't want to hear it, right? And everyone be like, all right, roger that, we're doing it. Where, you got females now, you got people from different backgrounds, maybe people are having a bad day. Like that approach kind of, doesn't really work. And I think that's the biggest adjustment. And I've seen that with some of our other special operators that we've brought in to work for us. And I've given them that same speech of like, hey man, this isn't a SEAL platoon. So when it's us in the room, we can absolutely roll like that. But like when we have other people, like we got to tone it down because these people are intimidated by that. And it's not malicious. We just need to be a little bit aware of how that's perceived.
Bear, really enjoyed this. Learned a ton. I got a few lightning round questions for you before we sign off here.
Okay.
Every bootstrap founder should
be brutally honest about what your actual unique value proposition is for anything you're trying to start. And if you can't come up with one, take it out back and shoot it and don't do it. Go work a 9 to 5.
What's a decision you're wrestling with right now?
Probably cash flow right now. With supply chain, a new building, a supplier that went south. We lost $1 million on that. You need to be really careful with your cash flow as your business grows.
How does that manifest for you now in terms of your day-to-day and what you look at and how you think about cash flow?
Well, it was kind of the perfect storm. And this is how you got to learn everything the hard way. We had to eat about a little over $1 million in fabric because the supplier screwed something up, and it's a place where we probably can't pursue litigation. We also launched our retail store, and we pulled from our operating line of credit to help fund that store. It was about a $600,000 build out when that should have been its own financing package. So I think the biggest lesson for people listening is if you have an operating line of credit that's really meant for inventory, make sure you use that for inventory. And when other things come up, segment that out and make its own financing. So you're not, cannibalizing your own line of credit that's really meant for a growing business. And as you know, when you're growing north of 30, 40, 50%, the cash flow actually becomes in some cases harder because even though you're profitable, you have to project out, and especially depending on what your payment terms are with suppliers, like that actually can become a cash flow negative position. Depending on what your net operating margin is. Like if your net operating margin, I saw a stat, if it's like below 9% and you grow more than 30%, that year you will be cash flow negative, like just mathematically. So I just think that's something you got to be really careful on it. And yeah, maybe you and I should talk after this. Maybe you guys can help us.
We could definitely help you. But when you say net operating margin, you're thinking about contribution margin after ad spend, right? So all of your variable costs after sales before your overhead.
I was talking about your net operating margin percentage.
Okay, so I got you. So like basically your EBITDA, your company EBITDA.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're at 9% and you're growing north of 30%, like you probably will have a year where you actually at the end of the year have less money in your bank account because you're, and obviously that's not a cut and dry 100% of the time. But a lot of people don't realize that. It's like, oh, you grew 40%, like you must be killing it. And as an owner, it's like, oh, actually I haven't taken a distribution in 3 years because we're growing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you could be profitable and broke.
Exactly. And that's kind of usually how it goes,
Bear, thank you so much. This was amazing. Really appreciate you coming on, and congratulations. I mean, you took a business with $4,000 into the 9 figures. It's really impressive. And I'm sure there's even bigger things to come for you. So really appreciate you coming on the pod.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been fun.